agent, and I kind of oversee that and then take care of the 6 artists that we manage. That's me.
Which are who?
Awesome.
I manage Quake Matthews, Pat Stay, KO, Sir, Maddie Galaxy, and Nicole Ariana.
Very cool. All right,
Lots of
so
patience.
we have some pretty amazing people up here. Also, we're doing a showcase tomorrow night, so for any of you who would like to come and mingle a little bit more, please come out to XQ's tomorrow. Show starts at 9. Okay, so we're going to keep rolling here. So many artists, the main goal is to release music. They just want to get their music out there. So sometimes it's okay to release things sporadically, but especially with like a full album or something you've put a lot of time, energy, and money into, what is the best, what kind of a timeline should an artist be thinking about before they even come up with that kind of plan to release music?
Longer than you want. Longer than the music that's burning a hole in your pocket that you want to get out there takes. The battle is won or lost before it's fought. So you need to not rush it out and hope for the best. You need to have a plan that you know is going to produce results, because hoping something's going to happen is going to make nothing happen.
And I think it has to be more than just your people saying that it's a good album. I think part of the planning is getting other people from the community to listen to it and give their feedback, even if it's, the kind of constructive criticism that you might not want to hear. I think it's worthwhile to get people outside of your circle to give you that feedback, so you know whether or not you need to go back into the lab to redo something. But just like further to what Kyle said, you have to have some type of plan. You can't just kind of go by the seat of your pants. You have to plan your work so you can work your plan.
I'd also say that the planning comes in different phases of planning. So I believe in initial planning is really about like the artist's development. And then after the development is at a certain point, then it's really about, okay, are we ready to actually release something? Because first impressions really do matter. Do you know what I'm saying? So, one of the things, I speak every week about really is just the fact that I feel like some artists create artistry but don't really take a second to step out of their own body to look at themselves and say, okay, is what I created as a brand, myself as a brand, and what I have something special? And is it authentic? Is it, is it real? Am I coming from a real place? Because when you launch yourself, that's what's going to help actually make that plan come to existence, is actually what's behind it. You know what I mean? So I think that that's a really crucial thing, because I feel like that's the one element I feel a lot of people forget, is they just, I got the record ready, I did the artwork, I got, and like, let me put it out. But they're not thinking about all the other steps before even getting to that point.
Just to add to that, one thing that I tell the artists that I work with is, if you take into consideration the amount of time that you spend writing, looking for beats, recording, and, getting that project engineered, like, you take that exact same amount of time and put that into the marketing and the rollout piece, of your project. I understand, like, the patience piece coming from an artist where that music might feel old and you just want to get that music out, but you also have to realize that there's really no one waiting to hear your music in that sense, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just, so you want to do it right. Like, you're creating that rush because you've been sitting on that music for a minute. And then you also have to take into other people's timelines. So if you're going to do distribution, regardless if it's like a DistroKid, that's, 2 to 3 weeks. If you have distribution through Fontana North or whatever, you're looking at another month for a timeline. If you want to work with a publicist, or if you're just sending your music or your release off to, just media people in general, you have to take into consideration that that's another 2 to 3 weeks. So every piece of the puzzle also has their own timeline, and you have to take that timeline and then, put that into your whole rollout.
I would also like to add to the current conversation, supply and demand is very much a factor. Just because you have an album worth of material that you're dying to get out there, if there's no demand for it, if you release that album worth of material at once, unless you have some very specific circumstances, like a very solid team of experienced professionals in place, you're wasting your album. You would get as much results from one single being released at a time. It's not about the album anymore. Streaming numbers show people are consuming singles. Playlists feature singles, they don't feature albums. You're better off building and maintaining momentum by releasing less music more frequently until you are at a very established level. And by very established, I mean making thousands of dollars digitally per song. There is a tipping point at which it starts to make sense to release more music at once because the amount of effort produces more income, but that's once you've already established a lot of momentum, a lot of online engagement. So really taking an honest, objective look at where is the real demand. Like if your monthly listeners on Spotify are in the double digits, you don't need to release an album. You need to grow by releasing singles and turning it into triple digits and then quadruple digits, and then maybe it's time to release an EP. You create demand by keeping the supply low, but also being consistent. You don't release a song every 6 months. Ideally, a month. I mean, it depends. There's no specific textbook amount of time. It depends on the reaction you're getting. If you're not getting a reaction, do something else.
That's great. You answered my next question because I was going to ask about, singles or how do you get that fan base to grow. So do any of you have experiences with how this has helped artists where they've released a single here or there? And also, does that mean should artists be releasing a single with something physical, or is that strictly just digital?
There's a lot of questions there.
There's a lot of territory covered.
I think Kyle hit the nail on the head, especially for the hip hop. And I'd say I wouldn't even say hip hop. I'd say urban. Like we're talking R&B, hip hop, all that stuff. I think that we're the leading. Like the reason why it's blowing up is because I think a lot of it has to do with the culture of the music. Like we've always been like wanting to have the freshest shit first. Everything's always had that type of place. So the fact that songs can come out and literally on Friday, everybody's going to want to hear the latest shit. By the next day, everybody wants to hear the latest next shit. It's always like that. No other genre of music actually has that same type of like pull. You know what I'm saying? So I think that that's what's actually propelled this genre of music to that level of like where we are now in the streaming world, right? The trick now is, like you said, is like, how do you build a brand off of that? How do you actually create, and how do you actually turn it into an actual like, create the artist to be like, okay, there's an actual bigger picture here than just songs getting streamed. Because the one thing I don't want to put out there is like, oh yeah, get on, Spotify and get all these streaming numbers and you're going to blow up. That does not happen. I know some artists that have like 2 million streams, but you go to their Instagram, you go to their Facebook, you go to their Twitter, and it's a ghost town. You know what I'm saying? And I think a lot of that comes down to like, yeah, you can build up those numbers here, but the question is, how do you get the people that are hearing your song to actually become fans? Because radio, basically playlisting and all that stuff is like a radio stream, is what it is. You know what I mean? It's like people are listening to their favorite radio show, but how are you getting them to actually become a return customer? And I think that's the big question, because it's, getting onto these playlists, it is challenging and it is hard, but it's not impossible. I don't know if that answered your full question, but it was in my mind.
I want to talk about this.
Being on streaming platforms, and especially Spotify, is absolutely essential as a starting point. Like I was having a meeting earlier today with some other industry folks, and they were talking to me about an artist and I tried looking them up on Spotify, and they weren't even on Spotify. I said, they don't exist. And that's real. Like, if you're not on Spotify, like, you're not playing the game. Now, depending on Spotify as a business model is not the move either. It's part of the picture. It's a starting point, and there's lots of great potential benefit out of being on Spotify in terms of playlists, algorithmic playlists especially. It's not just about the curated stuff. Yeesh.
So rude of them up there.
Yo, turn it down up there.
Hey!
We're trying to stream something.
So Spotify is absolutely necessary. Like, you can't just be on SoundCloud. You can't just be on YouTube. Or like I said, like, when someone mentions an artist to me, the first thing I do is pull out my phone and look at Spotify, and look at their numbers, because I'm trying to gauge like how much engagement they have. But that's only the start. If you're trying to make money, if you're trying to make a living off of Spotify, you already have way more revenue streams that are equally lucrative, and by the time you're actually able to pay your rent from Spotify.
Just to add a couple things, just to go back to where we were talking about like the world of like singles and like albums. So we have this conversation all the time, and it's one of those things that, yeah, singles, yeah, albums work. And I think it definitely depends like on the type of artist that you are. But some of the things that come to mind, like if we look at a single-oriented, I guess, business model or like plan, for me, like when I work with Quake, he has an established artist and he has catalogs. So if he moves into this kind of single world, it's okay, because when you go to check him out as an artist, you're going to find that body of work. He can still tour regardless if he's putting out singles, because he still has a body of work to choose from. If you decide to take that single approach, at some point in time you have to have that EP or that project in mind, because with that single approach, you're building a fan base, but you can't tour off of one song. No. Right? So that's the other piece of it. So it has to be
Unless
this
that
balance.
song's a hit.
Even if that song's a hit, I'd say.
Sometimes if a song, I've seen artists tour off of one big song.
But then do they know you for as an artist, or do they know you just for that song?
Yeah, you want to be a classic. You want to be like Axl Rose, David Bowie, Eminem. You don't want to be like Flash of the Pan.
Of course not. Nobody wants to be a Flash.
So that's something just to kind of keep in mind, like as an emerging artist or as a newer artist, when you're taking that single approach, that there needs to be that balance, because you want to give that, if it pops, you want to give that fan base more music to check you out, and then and tour and get that revenue from there. And just to touch on the Spotify stuff too, like same what Kyle said, like yes, like it's great to get your music on New Music Friday, but your song is there for 1 week. So if you don't have, right, so of course you're going to see a spike in your numbers, and it's like, woo, I got all these followers, or I'm streaming at 100,000, but that's 1 week, right? So if you go in and you get your music on New Music Friday, and I know we're going to talk more about this, is like you want to have a plan in place. So whether it's New Music Friday, then it's Northern Bars, then it's whatever, you need to have a strategy in place so you can keep building off of that momentum, and it's not just like a one hit in that sense.
To go back to the strategy angle, I think what I learned from dealing with artists that basically have nothing, like, you know, starting from brand new, when I went and even had meetings with like the Apple people and Spotify and having conversations with them, is like what they care more about it than anything is actually seeing that the artist is actually very engaged. They don't really want to, like, they're not going to just say, okay, yeah, you're a new artist or you have a great song or whatever it is. They actually want to see results, and they're not just looking at results from a standpoint of on their back end in terms of you know, looking at numbers and all that type of stuff. They're also looking, okay, how active is that artist and pushing people to the platform, and they really pay attention to that. So we took that information, and we realized the first time the first two singles, the DSP, the digital service providers, weren't really like jumping on board. So but the artists that I worked with at this time had, you know, a huge following online, already had success on YouTube, already had people paying attention. So what we did is we really pushed everybody to try to say, go to Spotify, go to Apple, go to Tidal. We're not just focusing on one platform. We're focusing on all platforms because I believe that we all drive cars, but we drive different cars. And it's like there's different avenues, different taste buds for everybody. And you can't just assume that everybody's paying attention to one lane. You know what I mean? So we took that approach, and what we noticed is after like the second or third single, things really started spiking up to the point where we were able to get this on other platforms that weren't just Spotify owned or other things. They were, finding independent, curators and doing things to kind of drive the attention there. Once we were able to do that, I automatically saw all of a sudden them kind of paying attention. Oh, okay, you have this going on, because they actually see and feel that there's something authentic and it's not just another artist trying to like, can you please give us a handout? Do you know what I'm saying? So they're paying a lot of attention to that, and I think that's the strategy that people have to think about with releasing materials is being consistent. And what I mean by consistent is like if you're releasing a single September, like it's the momentum and consistency has to be there. And it's not just with releasing a single in terms of on the platforms, it's like the visuals you put out, the shows that you're doing, all those things add up to actually make the impact that single that you want to have on the release, and then build up to actually putting out a record,
I don't think that media coverage directly translates to short-term income, but media coverage definitely plays a role in Greg at Spotify's considerations when he's considering people.
You're talking like Fader and like that type of media stuff?
So I'd like to hear from Mel as a publicist, what kinds of things you think are working to get that kind of coverage today.
It kind of goes back to what Click was saying as far as engagement. Like, media likes to see that you're engaged with people, and they do the research without you even having to ask. If they see that there's any kind of little buzz, or you send them something and it looks interesting, they do the research before they even get back to you to see if it's worth their time. A lot of publicity still relies on relationships. And if you're an emerging artist, you're starting out and you're sending out stuff, it might seem like it's kind of landing on deaf ears at first, but you kind of still have to be persistent. And if you're really doing the work on your end, the background work, people will pay attention and it will come. It's not at the snap of the finger, but people will start paying attention.
And just to add to that, sorry, not to cut you off.
No.
How many people here work with a publicist? Exactly. So not a lot of people. So when you're reaching out to media, like you want to have all your shit together. So you either want to have a one sheet, you want to have your bio, you definitely want to have high res photos, you want to have your music in links. If it is a video, you want to have that link there. So when you're sending that stuff out to your, if it's a publicist or you're sending it out to your kind of media links, you want to have everything kind of in that one package. So when they look at it, especially if you're a newer artist, that, they can read through everything. They don't want to start like trying to search your name in Spotify or starting to search your name in Google to see who you are or where your music is. So if you're doing it independently, like majority of us are, have everything like in a really nice package for them so they can just look at it and kind of get all your information from there.
And I also will say that if you're sending stuff to DJs, especially DJs who are on radio, please have clean edits. Please make the DJ's job as easy as possible, because if the song is banging, but it's going to take them 15 minutes to clean it up, they don't have time for that.
What is clean? Like, what words are supposed to be cleaned up? Some people, some artists ask me those questions. It's crazy. Curse words?
Curse words, yeah. Curse words.
Even words that aren't even curse words but are nowadays social justice war, like you can't even say the word gay. Like, he said the word gay. I had to use the word gay.
Would expect that to be censored? If somebody
it depends
used the word gay,
on the context.
I think it's
if they use the
contextual.
word-
What if you use it just because it rhymes with the previous word? Because you're
It's very contextual, though.
Yeah.
It depends on.
Let's not get super focused on that, though. That's not really what we're
Just
talking about.
generally speaking.
Also, if you can
yeah.
put up your hands with questions,
Yes,
we
please.
can open the floor. If anyone has a question, you can put up your hand. But we need to wait for the microphone so that it's not awkward for the online community.
I don't want to jump away from what we were talking about a second
Right.
ago, because I think it's actually a very debatable thing that's been I've seen in the last maybe year, is the importance of media. And even though I know you kind of opened that up, and being a publicist, obviously you're going to see the importance in that. But I walked into rooms where people are saying media is dead. You know, I've walked into rooms where people feel like, you know, the impact is not the way it used to be. And I've seen it even myself with, like, you know, artists where I've put out music videos and I've seen websites post it, like, you know, maybe 3 years ago, and actually seeing results back. Like, you can actually see the numbers went up because you happen to be on a certain site. Where now it's like, I don't really see that as much. And when I ask even my students or young kids where they're discovering music, they're not saying they're getting it from a website anymore. They're not saying, oh, well, I go and I check out Complex every day, or nobody's doing that anymore. And that used to be, I think, a major thing. And now people are like, they're discovering music through, you know, YouTube, through Instagram. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, I think that's where a lot of focus, like, I'd rather personally, I'm not going to hire a publicist until I really feel like we're at a level that there's a demand where the phone is actually ringing for my artist. Like, I don't feel like I need to, I'd rather spend that money, because it's a lot of money for a publicist. We're talking, you know, $1,500 a month type of thing for 3 months. That's a lot of money. I could spend that on an Instagram campaign, a Facebook campaign, Google ads campaign, and actually probably get better results. You know, so I think that those are things to think about in the strategy, since we're talking about strategy, of where you are in your career. Not to dog publicists, because I think that they are needed, but I think it's a specific time in an artist's career that actually makes an impact.
Yeah.
I'd say publicity is a little bit of a later developmental thing than it used to be. Publicity used to be right from the get-go kind of thing, and now there's better ways to invest your tight dollars that you have to build the buzz, to give a publicist real ammunition to work with. If you don't have enough ammunition, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter how good their relationships are. You know, in the height of Swollen Members' success in Canada, we tried hiring Snoop Dogg's publicist in the States, thinking like, okay, we're having this mainstream success in Canada. Let's spend a grip of money. And to be clear, in the States, it costs a lot more for publicity, but the income was there. So let's try and, we're going to get him on the cover of The Source magazine. You know, at the time, The Source was the big thing, you know, but spent like 20 racks and no results, because all we had was underground level stuff, not enough ammunition for them, despite having a platinum record in Canada. Like, there has to be things going on to really provide that ammunition. So it's not really an early developmental stage thing.
Just a few more things, like, just to touch on it, because I'm assuming most of you guys do this yourself anyways. Twitter has a really great search engine behind it, so a lot of people will ask me, like, how do I reach out to an editor? How do I get these contacts? Because I'm independent. How do I do that? Well, like, in Twitter search engine, like, you can write writer for Complex, writer for Exclaim Magazine. You can do that within that search engine and get those names, and then kind of, you know, backtrack to, you know, get their contact information or whatnot. And it's just to be realistic. Like, if you're an emergent artist, the chances of you getting a premiere in Fader or Complex is just not going to happen. So really, like, do your research and kind of figure out the lay of the land and, like, what, you know, publications fit where you're at right now, and then focus on those. And you can easily build those relationships on your own. Just take the time, do the research, and once you figure out who those writers are, take a look at what they're writing and who they're covering. So when you hit them up, like, you do not send an email like, hey, this is Melissa MacMaster from Halifax. I just released my new single. Can you take a listen to it? Or, you know, can you put something in can you post this on HipHop Canada for me? Like, find out who the writer is, figure out what they're writing, comment on, like, the last thing that they've written about, or try to engage with them first on social media and not through their DMs. Like, try to create a conversation with them. Again, it's all about building the relationships, and you don't need a publicist to do that.
I also think the great thing about doing that technique or that tactic is really like, it's always good to do the DIY first, because when you do hire somebody, you kind of, like if you've done the homework, like I've realized certain people that I don't need to work with, because I'm like, I had a booking agent. I'm like, okay, I don't know them. I'm like, if you don't know the friggin' booker at this venue, then you're in the wrong, like I have the wrong person. Like that's how you can also know right away who you're dealing with, if they're the right people, because you've done the homework to find out who's the right writers and who's this and that, Doing that homework will just make you a stronger business person at what you're doing.
And sorry, I just want to add like one more thing. The publicist thing is like a big thing for me. We're working with someone right now in Toronto, and it's going really well. But it's just setting those expectations and really like knowing what they're going to do. And you can't get hype on who they do work for. In that sense, like sometimes like, oh my God, I'm working with Drake's publicist, and it's like, really, like that doesn't, like, how is that going to help you? Like all of their contacts are probably, at a complex fader level, and what you need is not that at that moment. So again, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, completely lost it. Yeah. Oh yes, sorry. So for me, like I work on the East Coast, and in Halifax, Atlanta, Canada. Again, there's probably like 10 publications that I'm going to reach out to, but I have that like on lockdown. So I don't expect like the publicists that we're working with to have those same connections, but we can build off each other's relationships. Today, she just flipped me an email and she said, look, they came back. Your artist only has 4,000 views on that video. It's not going to happen. But can we brainstorm a different angle that we can kind of pitch to them? So again, like we're working together on, different strategies for different markets in that sense. But again, it has to make sense for you.
Give me 1 second.
What about when you want to release a new single as an independent, and you know that your song is one of the hottest in the world? So you release your single. Check this out. You release a single as an indie. Boom. Now it's a pyramid. There's the people on the top, the majors, that are scanning like the Eye of Sauron. They're going, where's the new hot song? And then they see it, and then they siphon it. They change it up a little bit. It's like when I released my single Good to Go in 2008. There was another artist that released his single in 2008 called Good to Go by Yellow Wolf, and I had his publicist. And then I released a single. I was like, oh, okay, I see what you guys are doing. Stealing my thunder. So then I released a song called Zelda. But what I'm saying is there's a lot of ways where an indie can release your song and people will steal it. And you guys know I'm telling the truth because you've seen many documentaries about this. So be very careful.
What's your question, though?
Be very careful where you release it, because a lot of these blogs, they're just partners with record labels that want to steal your shit. That's why there's songwriting. Be careful. Okay. Well, if you're going to release it, should you do it through a music publisher so that you know that you're going to be kind of getting some money on the back end, and you're not doing as an indie hoping to make some noise? Do you know what I'm saying?
That makes no sense. I'm sorry. And I
That's okay.
No, keep it real. It's hip hop. What do you mean? How does it not make sense to you? What he's saying? What do you mean?
Don't you get what I'm saying? Like, there's been many artists.
He's basically saying. He's wondering. Your question basically is like,
How does he protect himself?
How should I protect myself? Do I have to go through a publisher because the big bad labels are going to steal my music?
I mean, you're in a difficult position if that's the case, where you're competing with someone with very deep pockets. When we're talking like legal battles, you probably don't have the money to do battle with them legally. I don't really know what you can do other than, if you can provide proof that you had the song first, then you are legally
Sorry, this is a little bit more of, we want to talk about like more of a DIY approach to this and how artists can do it for themselves. So we're not really talking about like the higher ups taking
You want to speak to me after? I'll tell
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you know, let's talk about that after because I think
We just want to make
less-
this relevant to
Yeah.
everybody in the
Yeah.
room. And here, Shay, we'll pass the mic to you.
So my question is kind of about that. So I come from the era, obviously I've been around for a minute, I come from the era where the PR kind of started from the beginning. And I went out to the CMWs and I met the publicists out there and that sort of thing. Hired people, wasn't the right people, wasn't the right fit for me. Typically the way it ends up. And then nowadays it's part of the grant system where you need a PR person. And I find that your strategy is correct. Why am I spending this grant money, which is like $2,000 in, $2,000 out to somebody that I know is not really going to do what they're intended to do? So my question is that, you know, are there independent PRs that are actually in the hip hop world that are actually able to provide those services? And who are they?
Absolutely. There is,
Yes.
but you have to have enough going on to really warrant their interests, let alone the interests of their media contacts. You know, like, I don't know, I hear Dalton Higgins' name once a week. I want to work with Dalton Higgins. But Dalton doesn't want to work with people that aren't already well established, that he has the ammunition that he can actually make a good argument on behalf of the artist that he's chosen to represent. And that's a courtship. That's something that takes time, you know?
Yeah, there's that's a big challenge in Canada. But at the same
It's
time,
the music industry in Canada to a certain degree.
yeah,
It's entirely
the
different
other
conversation.
challenge of that is the fact that the landscape of Canada, there's not a lot of outlets that specifically are urban skewed. So you're also right away, really, you're chasing a lot of American outlets, a lot of UK outlets, a lot of like other places. There's really not a lot in Canada. And that's why I'm like, why am I hiring a Canadian publicist when I can just call these people myself individually and reach out to them? You know what I mean? And I think that when you get to the level where like, okay, you have some nominations or you have some big accolades or you're on like a 20, 30 date tour, you have all these things that
Online
really
engagement.
Online engagement, you have all these things that kind of cater to needing a publicist to sell the story that you have going on. Because that's the first thing that a publicist is going to want to know is what's the story. You know what I mean? If there's no story, I can't sell this. Him mentioning Dalton, I mean, Dalton was a writer. You know, he came from the urban music community. He's probably one of the first big like writers who wrote in like The Source and all these magazines back in the day. So he really like, you know, lives by the pen, die by the pen type of mentality, right? And, you know, he now has like a staff of like 3 people working with him. Like he's fully, you know, he realizes that, okay, shit, there's not a lot of people doing this that cater to this genre. That's why you're hearing his name a lot right now. But there's really not an hip hop publicity, like, you know, there's really not like if that would be a great model if you wanted to get in the business and have relationships there. There's definitely an opportunity there, especially now more than ever because all eyes are on you know Canada to a certain degree. You know what I mean? But I want to take it one step further. What this really comes down to is what a publicist does really is they have relationships. That's the word that matters the most here. And that's the word that matters the most, especially being here in Winnipeg. Because you're in the middle of nowhere, hate to say it like that, but it's like you're in the middle of the country where, you know, you have your own community, but if you really want to make an impact, you have to leave here to go get relationships. And those relationships are either going to be, you know, go to Minnesota, go to Chicago, go to Toronto, go to LA, go to Atlanta, go to, you know, those are the places, that's where things actually happen. And I've seen this firsthand where an example is Jazz Cartier, okay? So Jazz, I know this firsthand because I know his manager very well. I know for a fact the first couple releases was really about like introducing him as an artist. And they had a big time publicist in New York City. But really what changed his trajectory is when he went to New York City and the PR person connected him in meetings with people. So you can easily go and send your record to Fader, to Complex, to you name any fucking site you want to go to. The question is, how do you actually make an impression when there's 1,000 emails coming to them a day?
Minimum.
Exactly, right? So how do you make an impression? That impression is you being face-to-face in front of people. Because what sells them is them connecting to you as a person. Like the artistry of who you are when you walk in a room, you know? It's like the best person to sell music, in my opinion, is always the artist. It shouldn't be the manager. It shouldn't be the label. I should be able to put the artist in the room, and all of a sudden everybody's like, whoa, that's what you want.
You need to be your own biggest cheerleader, and that's something that I tell artists all the time when people approach me to do publicity. You have to be able to tell your story. And the big key word, the big takeaway, I guess, is that word relationships, because that's what will help you advance in your career.
Okay, so when we're talking about building these relationships that will essentially help your release, as an artist, should you already have, like, when, say you plan a trip to Toronto to meet all these people, should you already have a couple tracks out on Spotify before you go? Or, like, what is the, you know, I feel like a lot of artists want to have that material already out there so that they can go with something. But what is the best approach to that situation and trying to build those relationships to actually help that music grow?
I think that if you have a team in place, you can go out without having any music out there, but a team that's really going to open some doors for you. But otherwise, you need to have some numbers on the board. Like it's not time to export yourself beyond your city until you've actually established yourself in your city. It's not time to jump on a transatlantic flight and go to Europe if you haven't even put up some numbers domestically in Canada, you know?
But isn't that, you know, that's hard.
It's a chicken and the egg,
And the
isn't
reason
it?
why I say that is because I've always believed this. I feel like Canada is very conservative. We're a very conservative country. We always want to see shit pop somewhere else before we pop in our own backyard. You know, Drake did not fucking have the city on his back before he left the city.
Oh, definitely. I agree
even though he had a
helps
song.
grow.
But I'm saying
Yeah.
this guy wasn't performing on local shows. He was not, you know, I was the first guy to send out his records. Mel could tell you that shit. You know what I'm saying? And
He was performing on local shows,
but not to
no
the
love.
point. No
love.
love. Not
Yeah.
to the level where like people even knew that he was doing shows. Is my point. You know what I mean? Tory Lanez, another guy who had to leave the city to go to Atlanta. I've seen this in so many ways, and I feel it's not the same. Like in the States, like Atlanta, there's a real movement within doing shit in your own city. You know, Detroit even has that. You know, you can go to Chicago. Chicago has that. You can go to New York. You can go to L.A. All of them still have the trials and tribulations of trying to get heard. But one thing I've noticed in Canada, if it's hard in Toronto, it's even harder in Winnipeg. You see what I'm getting at?
I hear you.
I do believe
Past a certain point.
I do believe that you have to pay your dues. That's what I think is the real angle to this. To me, it's like if you're gonna go and get on a plane and go and try to find some relationships, you better pay your fucking dues, and that means you better be 100,000% sure of your art. You better be 100,000% confident in what you are about to drop in front of somebody, because first impressions count. And people, I'll tell you, there's an artist that I've been helping out. And before I helped him out, he came and did a showcase. He's not from here. He's from the prairie somewhere. And he came to Toronto and did a showcase. I wasn't at that showcase. But when I started, and I heard his shit, I said, yo, your shit's dope. I really like the shit. And I went and did some asking people around. Like, yo, you know this kid? Yeah. You know, I was at that showcase. They weren't dissing him, but the first impression wasn't wow. And that alone is now his battle of him having to go back. Because I'm like, yo, and he even knows. He even tells me, he's like, I wasn't ready. Then why the fuck did you do it? You see what I'm saying? And so I think that there's that what I'm getting to is you have to be, if you're gonna go make the trip, I don't think it's like you have to pay dues, you have to sell out 500 people in your own city. I think you just have to have your shit together so that when you walk in a room, you can really do your shit. And I really think the other thing is this: it depends on, like, this is not a cookie cutter. What you can do is different from what he can do.
True.
And you might be the type of artist who's like, I've already put in, some skin in the game. I got something to show. I got a story to tell. Boom. But he's got nothing. But he's got fucking personality. And he might have a strategy where he's like, I'm not showing nobody but a couple people. And he shows those couple people, and those couple people are like, dude, this shit's dope. He comes, and that couple people start introducing him to everybody. All of a sudden, he might get in the door quicker than you. And he has not as much skin in the game as you. Everything's about strategy depending on the type of music you put out. That's my opinion.
As a cold business perspective, going to meet them when I'm talking to somebody in another market over there, and this is kind of more physical era than digital, but the same rules apply in the digital era. The number one question about somebody was, okay, what are the numbers domestically? What are the numbers in their own country? And that was very much like, moving product. But I still very much believe in numbers helping win over industry level people to be able to say, like, okay, it doesn't need to be millions, it doesn't even need to be hundreds of thousands, but like thousands of streams shows that there's something there. Be more than 1,000, having not less than 1,000 on your songs on Spotify, having triple digit Spotify followers. Yeah, like that's what I meant by having to build locally before trying to export yourself, because if there's clearly nothing there.
But locally now is the net. Like, that's my thing. Like, locally is not always
that's
is,
true. Yeah, okay,
because some guys, the guy I talked about that had 2 million streams, most of those streams are in the UK.
Okay, that's
and
fair.
he's from Toronto.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying? So it's
Abdominal.
like, and there's another guy like Knight Lovell from Ottawa,
Yep.
who's like
Yep.
touring all over Europe and Australia,
Yep.
and most of his numbers ain't
That's
from
valid.
Canada.
That's true.
Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
it's like
that's
the
valid.
net has changed what local is.
Okay.
And that's why I feel like I don't want to get caught up in telling them like, yo, you need to sell out Winnipeg to fucking
that's
be a
valid.
star.
You need to build a foundation online before it's time to get on a plane, period. I think that's a better way to say it. That's the local, is there needs to be some engagement or you're not ready to get on a plane.
So
That's what it boils down to.
My experience was completely different. So take into account 3 years in the music industry. Before that, had no relationships, listened to top 40. That was it. Coming from Halifax, trying to launch a company and kind of break, some of my artists within Canada and out. So to add to these points, which are all valid and like great points, is, if you feel the need, or that you're like, okay, I want to go to Universal, or I want to go to Warner, or I want to go wherever, to whatever label, you shouldn't be going with the mindset like, fuck, I got a meeting with JP over at Universal, they're going to sign me. Like, that should never be like what's going through your head. So when we started working with Universal 2 years ago, it wasn't like, hey, these are my artists, they're really dope, can you sign them to a label deal? It was more like, hey, I'm Melissa, this is my company, this is who I work with, this is what we're doing. And we built that was building that relationship. It wasn't a sell, it wasn't a pitch. And the situation that we're in right now with Universal is probably the best situation that we could be in, because we're not in a label deal with them. However, we have an amazing relationship. And so when I need to go to radio, because I'm new, and maybe if I'm trying to hit up DMD or Frontside or wherever, they may not recognize my name. But if Universal is sending the email and saying like, yo, you need to connect with Melissa, or you need to connect with Quake or Ko or whomever she's working with, like that email gets answered and that phone gets picked up. So it's just being strategic, and honestly, it's building that relationship, and that relationship might take 2 years. It may take 3. I started working, in Atlanta 2 years ago, and like I just got back last week, and finally things are fucking like aligning, and we're feeling really good about it. So again, it's really understanding that things take a lot longer than you expect. You got to build the relationship, you got to foster relationship, and it's so much better to be like in a situation where you can hit maybe somebody at Universal or Warner with a track and say, here's my new music, can you take a listen to it when you have a chance and let me know what you think, than aggressively trying to get that kind of label deal, even if you want a label deal. I don't even know.
I've just got a quick question over here.
What do you do if you can't cross that border?
Like into the U.S.?
Yeah. Where, like, aside
Go to
from
the
Toronto,
UK.
Europe.
there you go.
Europe.
Okay.
Straight up.
Go to the UK.
I always recommend artists, even though it's a more expensive flight, etc. I always recommend that variable be avoided until there's really truly demand online, until those numbers are there online to warrant crossing that border, because that border is a bitch.
And you have...
And that criminal records aside, for people that have clean records, it's still it's still a variable. It's still a massive variable that can really, really mess you up.
You know what? Euros and pounds are way better.
And especially like for hip hop, like we just got off, like Quake just did a European tour last year. So if you look at, for me, like when I look at the US, like it's a very oversaturated market, right? So trying to break through the US is, it's going to be very expensive. It's going to be hard, and you're going to be going there a lot. But if you take a look at like the UK and different like European countries, like they still really love hip hop, right? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, it depends. It depends where your online engagement is.
Yeah.
Like where, what are your analytics showing? What are your
You want
Spotify
to go
analytics
to
versus YouTube?
a couple great, like Madame, like you said, is a great spot. I would also go to Eurosonic. I actually think if you want to get into the European market, Eurosonic's a great festival in Netherlands because it's pretty much all European people there. You're not going to see a lot of other countries. Like you go to Madame, there's Canadians, there's everything. Yeah. I've gone to Eurosonic and it's like, Canada, what are you doing here? And it actually opens up your door quicker because people are like, oh, hey, you know what I mean? Like, there's some really great, Reaper Bond's another great one. There's a lot of great festivals, and then there's real festivals that are paying for gigs. There's way more in Europe than there is in anywhere else.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the strategies for release, and there's a wealth of information that you've given on that, which is amazing. I do want to just, based on the time we have, I kind of want to shift a little bit to revenue strategies for a
Get money.
Yeah, just for a couple of reasons. With the streaming culture that we have, it's pretty hard to make money off of music, and if it's hard to make money off of music, it's even harder to get money to record it. So can we talk a little bit about how to make all of that happen?
I want to start by answering the first question you asked about physical product and so on. Things like publicity, things like streaming, those are casting the net wide and seeing what you can get. Everyone in this room has supporters. It may only be dozens of people, but under the right circumstances, that is a foundation to utilize, to build off of, to further what you're doing. I'm leading into crowdfunding here. Crowdfunding done right. First of all, crowdfunding done wrong is a waste of time. It's just like everything else. Like you need to do it right. You need to have the plan in place right before you launch your campaign, or you're going to fail. And if you're on a platform like Kickstarter, which you should be on, with its all or nothing funding, you could get nothing unless you've planned it out right to minimize risk and maximize potential revenue. The average contribution per backer on Kickstarter is $50 a head, and that's from people that don't know what they're doing. Sorry, that's $50 a head for music campaigns. Kickstarter publishes all their stats. That's why I'm using Kickstarter as an example. I have helped a bunch of artists do campaigns in the last couple years, and I'm averaging closer to $100 per backer. We're not talking huge numbers of backers, like 100 to 200 backers, but do the math. It's still 5 figures. Getting $10,000 or $20,000 without the question of, am I going to get approved for this grant, is pretty incredible for most developing artists. And artists with no fan bases when doing it right, can still generate in the mid 4 figures from people they know that might not even care about their music, but care about what they're doing and them as individuals, that kind of thing. Grants are never a sure thing, even with someone with a lot of experience with them. You can't depend on them. Crowdfunding, if you're doing it right, is not a question of if you're going to get the funding, it's how much are you going to get. And it's a great place to be looking if you need thousands of dollars to invest. You need to be careful to invest it wisely, and we should talk about that at some point too, and what to do instead of publicity. We already touched on it a little bit, but the point is crowdfunding is an incredible platform to generate income to turn around and reinvest in your career. So I know Click's done some campaigns as well, and I think you use Pledge Music for them.
Yeah, I've used Pledge. I've actually been a supporter myself. I've bought different CDs and packages and stuff from artists on Kickstarter. I've done all those type of things. What I've realized is I actually think like the crowdfunding is really hard if you're like a brand new artist. I think you have to have kind of a core fan base to make it work, and you could probably, in my opinion, you have to have at least, like, if you have, the best way to look at your fan base is like how many people they have on the mailing list, how many people they have on Instagram, how many people they have on Facebook, and take all those numbers and say, okay, this is the potential I could possibly reach, and then say I could probably get 20% of that. Because
I'd say it's less than that.
It might even be less than that. But I mean, on the high note, 20. Like, I don't know a lot of people that have been able to exceed that. Like, it's very hard, I think that the biggest thing about crowdfunding is being creative. Like, you have to be super creative. Like, the last record I did with the Rock Act, she did 3 EPs that were exclusive to the crowdfunders, 18 songs, and the crowdfunders actually picked the songs that made the album. Like, that type of stuff is like really cool, because it's like you're empowering the fans to be like, you decided what this record sounded like. You know what I mean? And that really helped, not only from the standpoint of like, giving incentive and building, relationships with your fans, but also helped with the story, because we did this before even putting out a record. You see what I'm getting at? So it's like, now we had a story that our publicists and our team was able to actually go and sell to the world. Like, this is a process that we did that was unique and special and part of the story. You know what I mean?
I think the most important thing to know about crowdfunding is it's a lot of work. Like, you have to have good work ethic in order to be successful with it. If you rather lay back and smoke weed, it's not for you.
And the reason why is because people, like, it's funny. I've talked to some people. I remember in my class once, I was like, is anybody crowdfunded? And a bunch of them like, fuck crowdfunding. They had bad experiences with crowdfunding that turned them off from wanting to be part of crowdfunding. And that's because when somebody, like, if I'm putting dollars towards you and I'm taking my hard-earned $100 to you, to a record I'm not even getting yet, I don't get it right away. It's a leap of faith. And that means, okay, out of that faith, I want to get reports every week. I want to know what's going on, because I'm part of this. And if you don't do that, you end up pissing off the fan. You know what I'm saying? And like, I supported De La Soul's last record, and there was a bunch of people, they had no idea how successful that campaign was going to be. It was huge. They made more money on that record than they ever made on any of their own deals, because they owned it all. Do you know what I'm saying? And the crazy thing about it is, I don't think they realized the work, not just the work in terms of creating, but the work that actually it takes to communicate with the fans. And you could see the fans going on the message boards like, what the fuck? We're not hearing anything. And like, people start like freaking out and shit. You know what I mean? Me, I'm like, I know that, people have jobs and other shit they got to do. You know what I mean? But the regular Joes, like your fans aren't going to, they're regular Joes. You know what I'm saying?
You need to treat supporters of a crowdfunding campaign like what they are, your biggest supporters.
Yeah.
And you need to be very careful with that relationship, because that 100 or 200 people, or maybe you have no fan base at all, and I still think you're good for 50 plus people from just people you know, unless you're a hermit. You know, those people are your core supporters, and you need to treat them with care and gratitude and so on, because you don't want to piss off the biggest supporters that you have. So communication is key. I'm going to scare everybody off a little bit now and say it's a multi-month process before you hit launch on a campaign of educating yourself, of planning and preparing. Like literally it takes, for someone working a day job, it's definitely months, plural. I've had artists who are fortunate enough to make a living from music who still take well over a month to do all those aspects. Like it is a work intensive thing. But if you have less money than time, you need to spend your time to generate more income. Like I said, done right, it's not a matter of if you'll get the funding, like a grant is, it's a matter of how much.
Were you asking about revenue streams from a standpoint of funding projects, or are you asking about revenue streams from a standpoint of like what's out there once you put your stuff out there? Like where do you make your money from?
I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of both, right? Because, you know, in order to record something or put out a project, you need the money. And a lot of times that's what comes once you release it.
Yeah.
But once you release it, nowadays it's so hard to even get revenue. So that was my question: is how does that circle work?
A lot of the developing artists that I've worked with on crowdfunding campaigns, the majority of the income from their campaign from their release comes from their crowdfunding campaign, because their biggest support. I mean, getting $100 per backer is pretty freaking incredible. Like Topspin, for example, published their data for pre-orders before, and they were at $25 per backer. Like, so to go from something like that and quadruple it is pretty amazing. And yeah, it's only 200 people, but do you want your $100 per backer, or do you want your 0.4 cent per stream? You know what I'm saying? Like you got to go for both. Like you're crazy to not do that. And it's not just from a money standpoint, it's also from an engagement standpoint of knowing who your real supporters are and who are the people that really matter to your career, who you should be focusing to. You don't need to worry as much about the people you're getting 0.4 cents per stream from as you do those 200 people. Or if you're brand new, those 100 people, those 50 people, whatever it is.
So for us, sorry not to take away from the crowdfunding.
Something else too.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
So for us, like, we really focus on music placements. So our company does one-stop shop clearable hip-hop music. And what that really means is that there's no samples in the song. The song can easily be cleared.
Repeat that again. There's no what?
Samples.
Or they've been cleared.
Sorry?
Or they've been cleared.
Or they've been cleared. And that, you know, you own 100% of that music. So you own 100% of the publishing, and you own 100% of the master. So that's one thing that's...
Does everybody know what master and the master and the publishing is? Yes, raise your hand. Okay, just making sure.
That's
you know?
good. That's good. So that's one thing that we really do is we place music in TV and film, and that has really generated a really big revenue stream for a lot of the artists that we work with. And we've done that to UK brand campaigns to $14,000 to placing their track on MTV for $500. So that has worked extremely well for us. But again, it took a lot of work. It took a year for my company to like build those relationships, with music supervisors, and really get into a place where that just runs itself, and our artists can eat off of that to support the recording and touring and everything else they want to do.
The sync world's a really special thing, actually, because especially for hip hop, and I know Kyle has experience with this too, is like there's so much opportunity there to a certain degree, depending on the genre and where you are, because there's a lot of hip hop that a lot of TV shows or films want but can't afford it. Like, you know, they want the new Future joint, or they want to know, they're like, okay, that's out of the budget. And so they're going, and a lot of it is like, we're looking for songs that sound like this, you know? And there's a lot of companies out there who also offer services of like, yeah, we can get you in this, and we'll take some of your publishing and all that other type of shit. I've found the most success has come again from making your own relationships. Like I've made over $200,000 in syncs in the last like 3 years, you know, and that didn't come. And even though I have other companies that actually I've built a relationship with to do the work for, but all those syncs came from people that I actually know. That's what I noticed. Is like, you know, I have a company in LA that I you know work with to get my placements, but they didn't do any of those ones that I got. It came from my own personal relationships of knowing supervisors and knowing certain people, and them reaching out to me saying, "Hey, Click, do you got something?" You know what I mean? Or them knowing the artists that I work with and saying, "Hey, I want to use this." So I think like that's a huge, you know, it's helped pay for records, it's helped pay for tours. You know,
and it's not like music supervisors, like you can't reach them. Again, when you're looking at different conferences, like we were talking about CMW Week for hip hop is not the best conference to go to. However,
Sync Summit.
But however, they do 2 days, which is a Sync Summit. So you get to, you know, it's $150. You go into this room and you can meet 25 to maybe 35 music supervisors and getting their contact, you know, pitching their music to them. And to me, that's the value there. So it doesn't mean you can't do it because you're in Winnipeg. I'm in Halifax. And we met all of our music supervisors at the very beginning by just hustling the conference circuit.
Going to Toronto around TIFF, there's always things like that too. A lot of music supervisors go there. If you go to syncsummit.com, Mark, who actually does the CMW one, he does one in LA. He does it with Music Expo Conference. I've been to all these, you know, and they're really good because the people that are actually there are real movers and shakers that are doing like HBO shows and doing like all types of shit.
To be clear, don't waste motherfuckers' time. Like, you need to know the game before you step to any of them because they don't have the time or the interest in teaching you the game. You need to know every aspect of it, and you need to know how to say as few words as possible to get them what they're looking for, because it is extremely, extremely competitive, and there's a lot of people out there.
I wouldn't even recommend them like you going trying to pitch.
No.
It's going to build a relationship. Like that's one thing I learned is like it's about meeting people and just getting to know who they are. We're all people, you know what I mean? And once you've met them 2, 3, 4 times, all of a sudden it's like, hey, and it's like your best fucking friends. You know what I mean? It's the weirdest shit.
And just like one thing, just like in general, like regardless if it's music supervision, working with a publicist, whatever, like you guys have to be organized as an artist. So like especially on the music supervisor stuff, like if you're going to send any music, like you have to have your instrumentals for that track, right? You have to have your MP3 or your wave. You have to have a clean edit if it's hip hop. And if you don't have those 3 files, don't even try.
And even if you can have stems is even another step, because what she's saying is you might have somebody who's like, okay, I want to use it for this scene, but we're only going to use the instrumental, this part, and then we're going to bring the vocal up. They want to be able to manipulate it a little bit. You know what I mean? So you have to be able to have all those different elements. Another idea in terms of revenue is, does anybody know who Anders is? Anders, R&B dude. So what I noticed about them and how they launched their project is he's not signed, he's independent, but he did a cross-Canada tour, like a listening session that was pretty much paid by Remy Martin. You know what I mean? Like, that's the other thing is looking at brands, be it clothing lines, be it liquor, whatever, well, especially with weed now, like it's like a perfect fit for hip-hop. You know what I'm saying? Like, depending on what type of hip-hop you do. But it's like, you know, I think like there's a lot of different synergies that can actually work with like, you know, brands that can actually put money behind your project. Like I know for a fact they put a lot of money behind that project, but a lot of it had to do with relationships because his manager is a club promoter and he does parties with Remy Martin all the time. So put 1 and 1 together, boom, you got 2. You know what I'm saying?
For sponsorships, I would suggest you start by looking locally. If you're trying to build relationships, don't try and step to the national businesses, like unless you have already an in with relationships there. You know, even if it's just a contra deal for product initially, like whatever, like you can get support from businesses that will actually be interested in, hey, I can get 10,000 YouTube views, you know, and I can feature your product in it or whatever. and it's still valuable to them. Like I had an artist tell me a couple weeks ago that they wanted to get Vans. I was like, Vans isn't interested in you, like you try and find a local shoe company, something like that. Like you can't be step into a multinational corporation. And believe me, it's about numbers, especially there. They want value if they're going to be providing value. They want to benefit. So it's not a handout. Like you've got to show them ways. Like, hey, look at the streams I have. Look at the video views I have. Look at the social. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'll wear your shirts on stage at all these tour dates or whatever it may be. And make sure you're staying. Again, there's that word again, authentic. Make sure it's consistent with who you are. You're not just trying to get a little bit of money, like, because that will hurt you more in the long term and cost you money by doing something that isn't consistent with who you are, your identity, what your supporters think of you and your identity. You don't want to just shill for a short-term small check or even large check. You need to...
Or free clothes.
Or, yeah, rock the free clothes that you would rock if you paid for them. Don't just look at it like, hey, this is some corporate sellout shit. It's not the move.
We're actually starting to run out of time, but I do want to open up the floor to any questions that anyone has about anything that we've talked about in the last little bit, if you have them. Anybody? Awesome.
Boom, yo, I'll stand. You were talking about engagement. How can you drive that? Or how do you drive that? You know what I mean? Because, like...
Consistency?
Well...
Online? Online? Like start online?
Mainly online, sure.
Okay.
But any kind of social media or streams, you know what I mean? Like...
Consistency is part of it. Like it can't be like you're here and then you ghost for weeks or months. It's got to be an ongoing thing. I think that you need to be cognizant of the fact that you can't just reach your existing supporters. That's not going to grow things. Like you need to make some investments into growing your audience, as in Facebook ads, as in Instagram ads. Google AdWords is a tougher nut to crack. Like it's terribly not user friendly. Like if you're starting to get into advertising, like boosting your posts and stuff like that, start with Facebook. It's much easier to do. Like I'm not an advertising expert by any means, but I struggle my ass through Google AdWords every time I open it up. It's difficult. So be conscious of the fact that your existing supporters aren't going to move the dial for you that much, other than the ways we've already talked about. Like you need to be, $10 properly spent, well targeted, can get you 1,000 new of the right eyeballs, or 1,000 new right people, 2,000 eyeballs. And if you have the targeting right, it can actually be people that become fans. If you're aiming at people who like stylistically similar but more established artists in the right market, then you have a high likelihood of converting them from a lead to a customer, to use like internet marketing parlance. So, and you start to grow the relationship with them as well. Keep being consistent and growing your audience through that outreach. And I'm not telling you to spend thousands of dollars. I'm telling you to spend $10. And if the $10 isn't working, stop, reevaluate, look at your targeting. You don't need to spend a lot of money. Yeah, test.
You have to do a
absolutely.
lot of testing. Like there's going to be a lot of fails before you realize it actually works, And you have to really make sure that your targeting is like to a minimal and not spreading a large net, because that's where you'll fuck up.
And I want to actually speak to the local thing again, because I recommend artists with their $10 spend it locally if possible, because not only do you get the potential benefit of the online engagement, but you might build some live fan base that you can perform in front of within a matter of months. Definitely.
Or look at the insights you already have. Like Spotify is great that they have the analytics they have. I go there and I look at, okay, what are the cities that seem to be gravitating to this? Do I want to continue pushing to those cities, or do I push to cities that aren't even on the radar. You know what I mean? Like, it's two ways of looking at that, you know? I'm really interested to see what iTunes has. iTunes is about to launch their analytics back end soon. So, you know, it'll see how that looks. But, you know, using analytics.
Apple Music.
Apple, yeah. Did I say Apple or say
I said
iTunes?
iTunes.
Yeah, same shit. But, you know, my point is, at the end of the day, I think that level of engagement is important in terms of, like, advertising. Do you have something else you want to say? I was going to say
I'll
something
add
else.
one more thing before. I always feel like I'm taking your
No,
spotlight.
we're together.
Yes, okay, so consistency, 100%. The other piece is like content. So creating content for your different social media platforms that you can engage with your audience and that your audience can engage with you. And then just definitely be engaging with your audience on your social media platform. So trying to create a conversation, talk to them in the comments. And then the other thing that I try to get my artists to do, and I know everyone's different, is I think as artists, you guys take that for granted because that's something that you're so used to being. But you have to realize that a lot of your fans aren't artists and they just want to live vicariously through you. So sharing that process, sharing that journey, sharing what it's like being in the studio, how to make a beat, being at a conference, like sharing all of those experiences with them is a way for them to kind of actively engage and feel like they're a part of your journey. And so those are like the three things I try to get my artists to do, is just be consistent, create a lot of different content, and open yourself up to just sharing this journey with your fans.
Engagement comes in another form as well. It's like, it's weird. It depends on the type of artist you are. Like, it's like no engagement sometimes can work depending on the type of artist you are. Like an Alan Raymond, a Weeknd is a perfect example of that. This is a guy who never put his face anywhere, who refused to do interviews, refused to come to my fucking award show. Like, he was very, like, right out the gate. His management was like, we don't want anybody to know what he looks like. We don't want to do any interviews. And they did that for, like, over a year.
Yeah, like a year and a half.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it just actually built the momentum and curiosity and mysteriousness of who he was. And I think, like, that can help as well, but it has to be authentic to who you are as an artist, and it doesn't make sense. The other flip side is, I know another artist who basically can tell me almost every hardcore fan that they have because they have a database of it. They have an actual Excel sheet that says the name of the individuals that are signed up to the mailing list to the T of their kids' names, their dogs' names, their birthdays, to the point where they send Christmas cards to some of their fans, just to show how engaged they are. Because doing that little tiny thing like that makes that person so excited that, like, yo, I'm going to go travel around the world to go see this guy perform or this girl perform. Like, that level of engagement is what also changes.
Or I'm going to throw down $800 on a crowdfunding campaign on a bigger perk. Boom.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
The other thing is engagement. The other thing I find that really works, especially in the hip hop world, is like egging on your fans. And what I mean by egging them on is like, you want a new song, you need to do this. That's how you get the engagement. If you can't get your fans to jump when you want them to jump, you don't have fans. That's the way I look at it. You have watchers. You have people that are watching you, but are they actually engaged and actually want to do something for you? So it's really about turning the onlookers into lovers, into soldiers, into evangelists, so that they actually go out into the world and say, this is the fucking best artist on the fucking planet, and I got his underwear. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
That's really real.
Like, that's the mentality that you're looking for in terms of, like, what you want to do. And not every artist is shaped that way, but if I have to break it down to engagement, you know, it's like that. And it's how you talk to, like, if you see fans freaking out, the first thing after your show is you need to go right to the merch table. Even if you have no fucking merch.
Off the front of the stage. Like, don't even let them lose sight of you. Go off the front of the stage and lead them to the merch table.
Exactly. You want to have that conversations with them because, you know, I actually saw you perform. You probably don't even know that, but I saw you perform in front of a huge audience of people, and they were losing their fucking mind on you. And I didn't stay to the end, but I hope after that show The way you engage is you actually connect with those kids right after the show. You go out there and say, yo, what's your name, man? Yo, follow me on Instagram. I'll follow you back. Do the follow back shit. Like, do that stuff, because that's what makes them feel like, dude, this kid's shit. And they tell somebody else. That small little bit of engagement can change everything.
We have one more question back here, and then we're probably going to have to wrap it up.
Just talking with engagement and everything and all the different platforms, is it a good or a bad idea to focus the same content amongst all of the platforms with things like, what is it, like Hootsuite and those different ones that can echo out to different places? Is that recommended, or is catered content to each platform?
I think it depends on what the content is, to be honest. You'll find that certain types of content just get higher rates of engagement on Instagram, but on Facebook, for whatever reason, it just doesn't translate the same. So that's probably part of your testing phase that Click was talking about. Certain things that might work for him might not work for you the same way, and you'd have to be patient, and that's part of your research. Test what works for you and what budget works for you, like Kyle was saying.
I'd also like to add, it's really about connectivity. It's really about making a strong connection, as many strong connections as is possible. If you appear to be corporate, you're not going to make a good connection with people. If you try and be like, oh, I'm a big business, they're a lot less inclined to support you. Yes, the weekend is the exception to the rule, I'd say. Like, I don't think most of the people in this room are going to have any success trying to replicate what the weekend did. I think your best path is to create as much of a connection with people as possible. That's just the era we live in as a general rule. And I think the stronger the connection are, the more you're going to be able to get a couch to sleep on when you're on the road. The more like on a really DIY indie level.
Somebody to work your merch.
Yeah, somebody to work your merch table. Somebody to tell 10 friends, whatever it may be. But the point is, somebody to contribute to your crowdfunding campaign. Somebody to help you line up a show. There's so many different angles, and just the more, like, forget about looking at like, oh, I have X number of friends on my Facebook page. Like, nah, anybody you requested, that's not what it's about. It's about real engagement. Like, how many people are looking at your Instagram? How many people are following your Instagram and interacting with it? How many people are your Facebook fan page? That kind of thing. How many people are following you on Spotify? Those are the things that. How many people are on your email mailing list? How many people are you building a mailing list? Like this is kind of next level stuff, but building a mobile list for, because younger kids are saying, I don't use my email except for school and work. Like finding alternate means of direct communication that you don't have to pay Zuckerberg for. And
just to add to that too, like when we use Hootsuite, or when our artists use Hootsuite, we typically use it when we have a lot going on. So yes, it might be like kind of plan generated content. So these are the shows that if we're at a festival, like just to make sure that basic information is getting out there, because sometimes I'll get caught up at sound check or we get caught up doing something else and you're like, fuck, I didn't flip the poster out. So typically if we have a lot going on or we're on tour, like we use Hootsuite to put out that generated content, but then our artists come in and they couple it with their personal stuff. Yeah. It's the same thing even like with Spotify. Like sometimes if we know we're going to hit New Music Friday or if we're on Northern Bars or whatnot, and we know it's there, it's just like, okay, let's just schedule a couple tweets saying, go listen to the track on Northern Bars, or shout out for Spotify for putting it on there. But it's always coupled with their personal engagement stuff. It's just things that sometimes slip our mind because we get in busy situations. That's when I use those types of platforms.
It's funny. I used to say, it's weird. You'll find so many different opinions on this online about if you should be sharing on all platforms the same thing or not. And I always had the theory of and I still kind of do, but it's at CMW. I was just there and there was this whole talk about it. You should be sharing everything at the same time on all platforms. But I think it's like she said. I think it's really you're sharing the things that are important that everybody needs to know. But I think you have to give people special things on those platforms if you live on those platforms authentically. You know what I mean? If you're a Snapchat person and you're a Insta person, live in those spaces. If you're not really a Twitter person and you're not really a Facebook person, then you're not going to live in those spaces, but you're going to keep them active to let people know that shit's going on, the important stuff. Do you know?
All right, thank you. We're going to wrap this up.
The one last thing I'm going to say.
Click.
Out of all this shit, none of it matters unless you have good music. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the music still is the most important thing. You can't sit here and think all these business things and everything we're talking about is going to change the world, because it's all about the songs. And when you walk in a room, it's that songs what's actually going to get the relationship or whatever it is to pay attention, or the DJ who's going to play it on the radio show.
Thank
Amen.
you. I think I hear that at every single panel I go to. But it's true. It is true. So before everybody goes, I'm just going to let you know next week, actually exactly a week from now, just speaking about revenue streams, we have a free info session on copyright and royalties. So you can find out how to collect royalties from all over the world. Really valuable. Totally free, same time at 6 o'clock. Also, please fill out those surveys. And I would like to give a huge hand to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for coming all this way.
Can I plug something?
Yeah.
Northern Touch Music Conference. If you haven't signed up for it, make sure you do. It's another great platform locally for you guys. What is it, northerntouch.ca?
Yeah, you can buy passes at Northern Touch Festival.
Northern Touch Festival.
Yeah, no, actually, we got a slew of them now. We got like 50 volunteers.
Another great hip-hop specific resource that you guys should be checking out.
Yes. All right. Thank you for that.
Thank you,
And
Elise.
thanks for coming to, sorry? Tomorrow, I already did mention that before you came in late. No. Okay, tomorrow night we are having the Decipher HipHop Showcase. We have Helen back, Malcolm J, Makina 2, Kenny Merckx, and Lavish. And it's going to be at XQ's. Doors are at 8:30. Shows at 9. It'll wrap up early around 11:30, so it'll be a nice, quick, fun night. And we're going to be there to mingle. All right, thanks for coming. That's it.
Thank you, guys.